Welcome to the FML Podcast, the podcast on a mission to uncover actionable insights, explore the latest trends, and to catalyze your fintech's growth. Join Growth Gorilla's founder and managing director, Shamir Sajdev, and some of fintech's hardest-hitting marketers and leaders.
Welcome everyone to today's episode of the FML Podcast. Today we're joined by Oscar Mackenzie, Head of Marketing at Shares. Oscar, thanks for joining us today.
Hey Shamir, amazing to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
No worries at all. So Oscar's losing his podcasting virginity today with us. So I'm going to be really, really nice to him. Let's start at the beginning. Oscar, tell us a bit about yourself and kind of how you ended up at Shares.
Started my career, just about kind of 10 years ago now, actually. It was the very kind of early days of social media, kind of 2012, 2013 kind of time. I think my first brand campaign that I actually ever worked on was in automotive on Vine. If you can think back to that platform, obviously like defunct now. But that just gives you a bit of an idea around kind of, the kind of campaigns that I was kind of first working on when I moved into the industry. And it was a really interesting time for social back then. A lot of brands, small and large, knew that they needed to be on social platforms, but they didn't really know why or how they were going to operate there. And, you'd get kind of brands coming to you with these kind of absurd briefs when you look back at it. We just want to get to 1 million likes on Facebook or get us 100,000 followers on Instagram. So there was this kind of understanding that they needed to be in this space, but actually kind of very kind of little connection to actual kind of business value. There was this massive disparity really between kind of activity and kind of business value. At the same time, I think what that really kind of allowed for was, I think, an emergence of kind of agencies that I was lucky enough to work for who were really able to start making that connection between social and kind of business value as well. And that was definitely something that, I really kind of settled on as something that I really wanted to really kind of focus on at that early stage of kind of my working career. And so, as things progressed slightly, moving forward to kind of, 2015, 2016, worked for some amazing kind of boutique agencies who were really kind of working at the forefront of social to really kind of establish that link, as I mentioned, social content and the business value as well. And the brands came coming as well. So brands actually, were willing to work with quite small agencies if they were really kind of able to kind of prove, how social media was actually adding to their business. So I was fortunate enough to work for some really amazing kind of clients at the time. Everyone from kind of Google, North Face, Fiat Chrysler was my big client for a couple of years, Penguin Books, Channel 4. So I worked on a really nice range of clients in that space. And it was just a really amazing, I think, kind of, testing ground, I think, to really start to understand how we can use kind of content and social strategy to drive kind of business value. After agency world, I actually moved brand side. My first move was at an NGO, WaterAid. So I was there for kind of 3 amazing years, sort of heading up global social. As you can imagine, just a really amazing experience, really looking at how, okay, you're not just using social and content and strategy to just drive business value, but also to kind of, aid a social good as well. So really, really amazing kind of few years there. And also my first taste in really working at a global scale. WaterAid worked across 38 different countries. So I got experience working, at all different levels with these different country offices to really kind of look at, right, how do you take social content, from a central position? How do you work that for different audiences, different languages, different cultures? And how do you really break through, I think, that noise in a variety of different cultural settings as well? So really, really amazing to kind of get that kind of, broader understanding of how marketing and social can really kind of drive, some kind of, positive impact as well. That takes me kind of up to the kind of the past couple of years then. So moved into fintech in 2021, first at Clio, amazing kind of hyper growth savings app based in the UK, but with a majority of their audience in the US. I think they're up to just about 5 million users now, so doing super well. But they were really focusing on, bringing the topic of finance and money to a real kind of Gen Z audience. And that's something that I've been really, able to continue here at Shares now as well. So I joined Shares just about a year ago now, July 2022, looking after social and then kind of making the step up into head of marketing as well. That's a quick summary of where we are today.
So for anyone who's listening to this podcast that for some reason hasn't heard of Shares, do you want to just give us a quick overview of who Shares are and what you guys do?
We are an investing app with a mission really to make investing better. As a brand and as a company, we're so passionate about getting as many people investing as possible. And we're kind of super, super proud to be building this really kind of amazing community, not just around the product, but inside the product as well. I think for so long, investing has been a real kind of single player experience. And even though, okay, brilliant, over the past 10 years, we've seen, so many apps, so many companies popping up in the space to really make investing more accessible. Without the guidance, without the expertise, without the support of a community, you're still stuck at square one, even if you've got an app that makes the actual, act of investing easier. It's a tool, right? And so really at Shares, what we're kind of building is a real kind of community-based approach to investing. So within the app, you can join select communities all around kind of specific investment topics. Inside those communities, you can have conversations, you can follow the moves of other investors, really with this goal of kind of building an understanding, building this rounded view of really kind of, what kind of investments you'd like to start making. And hey, even if you're not confident enough yet to begin your investment journey, it's a space for you to really kind of begin having those conversations, to kind of get comfortable with a super supportive community around you as well. So that's our real play. We really want to drive the act of investing, not just through the tools that we provide our audience with, but also really through the kind of community that we are kind of, threading through kind of the entire product experience as well.
It kind of leads me to think two things, really. One is to build a community and create the feeling of community. You need to have a really, really strong content play, especially if you're going for the end of the market where they might be taking the first steps into the investment space. And then the second part of that is obviously the building of the community and then encouraging people to communicate with each other. I'd like to dig into both of those bits, if that's okay. So what is, Share's approach to that content production piece? And, I suppose that then leads into kind of your background of that, the social media piece. Can you kind of just give us an overview of that? Just tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think for us, this is just such a crucial part of the way that we operate as a brand. I think ultimately, we need to be kind of consistent, as any brand does, aligning really, the ethos of our product with the way that we are kind of communicating from a content perspective in online and offline spaces as well, actually. If we're all about kind of community as a product, all around kind of building that support, building that network, we really want to create this same energy and this same sentiment, with the content that we're producing as well. So we really take an approach that, we want our audience, when they are engaging with our content, when they're experiencing our content, to really feel better about investing, to feel more empowered on their investment journey. And this is a thread that really flows through everything that we do. If you take a look at our social content, for example, right from the get-go, we've invested so heavily in really building our brand through social. So we focus, not on kind of trend hopping or kind of, quick pieces that, disappear instantly. Instead, we're really focusing on, really providing kind of value for our audience, but in a way that still remains entertaining and engaging as well. TikTok's been a massive play for us. Instagram's been a massive play for us. I'm really focusing on kind of vertical video, short form, helping our audiences to understand the world of investing better. We're really sympathetic to the fact that getting started with investing, it's a mad world out there. There's so much information, there's so much noise, but actually, what we're here to do is to really kind of cut through some of that noise and provide the kind of information in a way that feels, native to the channels, in a way that speaks in a language that our audience are going to engage with, to really kind of provide that context and that kind of understanding. So if, have a look at our social content, our focus is almost on these kind of mini documentaries that we create all around either sort of breaking news, investment stories kind of, happening right now that we can create really responsive, but still really detailed and kind of considered content. We're digging down into, sometimes the amazing histories of different brands that you can invest in on Shares. We're giving that context. We're, turning the world of investing into, I think, a space that existing audiences and new audiences want to be a part of. And that's really, right from the offset, where we've kind of stamped our flag, is being a brand that understands the importance of content and really understands that kind of trickle down effect to kind of, content actually kind of building our brand long term as well.
I mean, we spoke about this kind of before we clicked the record button, which was about that long-term play. That part of the conversation kind of came about, we were talking about the more established financial services brands who've been here for 20, 30 years, who are thinking about where they want their brand to be in a year's time or 2 years' time? And then if we kind of look at the current state of the market and I suppose, growth at any costs, it feels like what fintechs are doing to some degree, and I might get in trouble for this, is they're kind of only looking perhaps a month ahead, a quarter ahead. Whereas I've noticed, obviously, shares, like you said, seems to be taking that longer term play. What do you think are the sort of building blocks around building a brand for the future? It'd be great to kind of hear your thoughts on that.
What's so crucial, I think, right now as well, is to really have your eyes on the long term and also the short term. I think both of these pieces, they need to work together. I think for us, we look at the long term. It's that piece that I mentioned. It's that long-term brand building. It's that investing in content. And look, brand isn't something that you can just suddenly kind of turn on. The effects of the sentiment that you build up and that you create, through kind of building a brand, it's not something that you're going to see the effects of, straight away. So I think we kind of take this play, and this goes for our social content. This goes with our SEO work, the blog that we're building, our newsletter. These are long-term plays, right? And we're super kind of conscious that this is what we're building as a foundation for the future. We're going to be doing this kind of stuff every single day with consistency. And I think that also has a huge impact on trust long-term, obviously in our space. Super, super important. The credibility, the trust. And okay, it's like, how do we define trust? I think there's that really nice quote of, trust being consistency over time. So showing up in the right spaces again and again with a unified approach, a unified tone of voice, a unified kind of energy and ethos and information that you're giving to your audience. So that's that long-term play. Of course, the short term is something that, we also need to consider at the same time. If we're just focusing on building a long-term brand, well, brilliant, that's going to have effects into the future. But of course, we need to also look at, how do we drive impact right now? It's actually really interesting to see that I think some of these activities, they can go hand in hand, the long term and the short term. The best example I can give you that right now is, okay, we're creating all of this social media content. Look at our TikTok, from an organic perspective, we've really started to hone in on how we can, really kind of go viral quite consistently on TikTok. We only launched our strategy, I think it was about 6 months ago. We're up to like over 30,000 followers on the platform now. We've done 1 million organic views in the last week on that platform. So we've developed this really nice approach to, kind of cracking that code on TikTok, which is amazing. Now, that content that we serve our audience on TikTok, I say our audience, it's going out to, of course, a very broad audience, but we're bringing those users to our page. We can then kind of consistently serve them content on a longer term basis. Same goes for YouTube Shorts. Same goes for Instagram Reels. But then when we look at the really kind of short term activity, okay, those audiences who we're hitting organically on TikTok, we're then building that into our conversion funnel. So this is when things get really, really exciting. And I think this is also, a bit of a cautionary tale for, a model that it can be quite easy to slip into on TikTok. TikTok is most effective when you can really kind of layer it up into your paid approach to acquisition. So that content that we're serving on TikTok that's driving the organic views, brilliant. We're then retargeting users who are actually kind of engaging with that content, whether that's they followed our page, they viewed a specific portion of that video, maybe they've left a comment. So we can then serve those audiences, obviously, with the more kind of clear kind of acquisition messaging. That's the cheapest CPM. That's the cheapest CPI that we're ever going to get. And we're seeing this time and time again, that actually it's around this balance of, kind of looking at our organic TikTok efforts layered in with our kind of paid performance, that we can really drive, kind of actual like measurable business value as well. I think the challenge that I think a lot of brands kind of fall into on TikTok is they're chasing views over everything. They're chasing the engagement on TikTok over everything, which leads to a focus on content that has a very short lifespan. It's trend hopping, it's trending sounds. And look, there can be value in that, of course. But, the attention span of users on TikTok is so short. Just going for that approach, I think really means that you're missing out on really developing a strategy that can kind of help you further down the funnel as well. I think maybe the way that I like to kind of really think about it is, okay, that upper funnel piece, obviously you want to fill that funnel with a super kind of wide audience, but that audience still needs to be qualified to some extent. And you qualify that audience by the style of content that you're creating. If you've just created a super random piece of content with a trending sound, okay, it might get a bunch of views, it might get a bunch of engagement, but that audience have no understanding of who you are as a brand. They have no understanding of your identity. They have no understanding of really, what your mission is. And so, okay, that upper funnel audience might be super, super broad. You might have kind of, a serious number of impressions. But as you try to convert those audiences, very quickly that funnel closes up. Whereas we're really taking the approach that, awesome, we want to reach the widest possible audience, but they have to be qualified. And so what that means is as we move further down that funnel, we move to kind of conversion, that audience, they understand a bit more about us. The first piece of content that they've seen has brought them into our world just that little bit more. So we then get kind of super efficient conversion, super efficient install as well. So I think it's just a really important piece to kind of to go back to your question, short term, long term. We consider both of them, but actually I think a lot of the tactics, a lot of the activities really kind of sync together really nicely.
Talking about the TikTok piece in particular, in reality, it's not fundamentally too far away from good quality SEO or paid search activity. If you're appearing for high intent, good quality keywords and you're driving that audience into good quality content, the volumes may be lower than say, let's take for shares. There's a difference between how to trade Forex, for example, versus trading platforms. One's going to be very, very broad, deliver a very generic audience that, do they have any intent at all, versus one that actually has high intent and you can serve them relevant content and then obviously push them down the funnel. But that's the hallmarks of good marketing though, isn't it, at the end of the day? And then, like you said, not just chasing people just for fundamentally vanity metrics.
I think this is the challenge with TikTok sometimes though, right? Is so much of the content that we see on that platform is obviously, by nature of the platform, by its very design, is very throwaway. It's very off the wall. It's just like the pace is obviously so fast. And I think this really kind of presents a challenge to a lot of kind of more traditional brand side marketers, right? Is being able to harness some of that energy, because you need to speak in a way that is specific to TikTok. You need to create content that, this isn't anything new at all, but obviously, being very kind of sympathetic and native to that platform requires, I think, a real kind of balance and understanding of really kind of what's engaging and what audiences are going to like and going to engage with and going to share, but also kind of understanding that going too far, I think, runs the risk of, right, as you say, filling your funnel with actually kind of users who are super, super low intent. It's an interesting challenge for sure.
It's, and especially I think in the shared trading investment space, you're talking about individuals who are taking their first step into investing or trading. Even that funnel in itself, your average individual, particularly in the UK, probably doesn't hold, stocks or shares. Might be happening a little bit more frequently now with other platforms. I'm not going to mention any names that have popped up over the last few years that have terrible UI, in my opinion. And they made it a little bit more common. But when you've got a universe of, if you think about the size of the investment and trading universe in comparison to, say, insurance or banking, it's a lot smaller. It's very attractive to go after sort of large volumes with low intent content. But like you said, that funnel, you realize very, very quickly it's just not working for you.
That's it.
So I'm going to be a bit cheeky here. We've talked about obviously not chasing the vanity metrics, but one thing we do see from shares, a lot of work around brand ambassadors. And we had Alex, from Shares join us, who talked about the influencer marketing piece. But I'm going to not talk quite so much about the influencer piece, but perhaps more about the brand ambassador piece. You've had Ed Westwick as, part of one of the campaigns that you did. More recently, there was an announcement from the Williams sisters that you're doing some sort of partnership with them. Tell us more about that. What's the tack there? What's the thinking behind that? And then how is that going to help drive growth for shares?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think this really goes back to this kind of piece that we're talking about, around long and short term. I think as a brand, we've been kind of really kind of fortunate to kind of work with and to look forward to working with kind of ambassadors who would usually be working with kind of significantly later stage companies. Williams sisters, really kind of amazing story there, actually. So Serena is actually an early stage investor in shares through her venture capital fund. And so she's joined Venus as, kind of global brand ambassadors, face of the shares brand, which is just, oh my God, what an opportunity. Really, really exciting to have them on board. We have some big plans lined up for the Williams sisters. We shot a campaign out in Miami with them at the start of the year. So watch out for that kind of coming kind of very soon. Very, very exciting. But, our approach to ambassadors is really around, we've been talking about this kind of foundational, kind of long-term content engine that we've built, right? From the social, from the blog, from the newsletter, so on and so forth, influencers, of course. I think what these bigger name brand ambassadors have allowed us to do and will allow us to do is really act as kind of tentpole moments throughout the year. I really love this idea, from more of a brand strategy kind of perspective, is that we have our kind of evergreen kind of content I've mentioned, but layering that up at just a few moments throughout the year. It's 2, 3, 4 moments throughout the year when you have this really kind of headline piece of activity and you invest and you go big to really kind of drive that kind of bigger awareness, that bigger kind of brand play. And of course, we tie that into our kind of acquisition activity as well. We're never just going for a pure kind of brand play. But it really, I think, allows us, especially as we look to expansion, for example, as we start to kind of reach new territories and go into kind of new kind of regions as well, having, these kind of figureheads, the Williams sisters, global icons, and really interesting from, I think, a brand story perspective. We love this idea that the Williams sisters, they have had immense success. As I mentioned, icons of the sport. They've come up together. They've done this together. They've won championships together. They've played on doubles teams together. They've lifted trophies together. But they've also had their individual success as well, of course, right? And there's something really nice that we like to kind of, play on with how they link into the Shares brand as well. Shares is really about, obviously investing. It is something that you're doing on your own for individual success. But of course, with a team around you, with a support network around you, that's actually, I think, what we're playing as is that next evolution of investing as well. So the Williams sisters, they really follow that narrative in a really interesting way. So I think just from a brand story perspective, just like the perfect fit for who we're going to be. Also, just bringing in, from a brand team perspective, the act of, writing commercials and, that kind of side of things, the production of a commercial and a campaign of this size. Super interesting, a lot of work, really, really excited for the world to kind of finally see this coming later this year. So, I think ultimately, if you are in the position to have brand ambassadors, with this kind of global footprint, it's really about considering like, where do they fit in your journey, not just, as a brand, like what's the story that they kind of play into, but also, of course, from a business perspective, where are they lending value? And I think for us, really, it's about looking at through the funnel. Of course, they fill that top of the funnel really nicely just with, the sheer kind of presence of their kind of personality and their kind of global fame. But it's then, okay, how do we thread their kind of partnership, throughout the experience of using Shares? Where do they appear throughout our different touch points? I think it's a really exciting space to play in. We're very fortunate to be in a position where we can work with individuals like the Williams sisters. But yeah, super, super excited for later in the year.
I think one of the points that you touched on is a perfect sort of segue into one of the other questions that I had, which was, you talked about that global piece and they recognise it at a global level. I think anyone who's been reading the headlines on Shares knows that there's ambition to launch into new territories. I think you've launched into a couple already. I know you've got plans to launch into a few more. What's your playbook for launching into new countries? It's very obvious, obviously, the Williams sisters, that partnership piece there is obviously part of that playbook. But it'd be great if you can kind of talk us through sort of like how you kind of like decide to launch into these territories, what's been your approach, and perhaps, some advice you could give to sort of other brands that are looking to launch into new countries.
Yeah, right. So I think this is going to be just like, I think, such an exciting step for the brand, for the company throughout the year and into kind of 2024 as well, really. The expansion piece is always, I think, there are so many interesting kind of elements to break down when launching. I think it's something that I have done at some previous companies, and it's always, I think, kind of crucial to really kind of, almost kind of unpick every element of your brand when you think about launching on like a global scale. All the things that you take for granted as working and as being set and as being kind of secure and successful, just because they've worked in your region, it doesn't necessarily mean they're just going to kind of translate directly and be able to kind of, be ported to another region. It can work in some kind of situations. There are elements, brand colors, icons, certain bits of iconography energy, I think, of what we're trying to build as a brand, that definitely kind of will stay true and stay consistent. But actually, when you get a bit more tactical, which is something I really saw, like WaterAid, for example, challenges in terms of localization, in terms of language, in terms of messaging, in terms of, that call to action that was so powerful in one country actually is going to be something very different somewhere else, right? These are obvious points, but I think they're, so fundamental to really kind of launching successfully in a number of kind of different regions. And so, we take like a very, I think, considered approach. We work with kind of our teams, across Europe, really to look at how we kind of localize in a way that's going to be kind of sensitive and obviously as impactful as possible as well. I think in terms of how we're looking to launch, as I mentioned, we do have this, I think, huge advantage of having a brand that we've built from the very beginning. I think this is another actually kind of really, really important point, which is that I think with the understanding that we have built this brand right from the very start, it puts us in a really strong position. There is, I think, or there was a bit of a challenge that I think a lot of fintechs have run into in the past, where, okay, you build a product, you get your traction, maybe you go through your Series A, your Series B, and that's fine, I think, to an extent, with a brand that maybe isn't kind of fully formed yet. I think what a lot of fintechs especially find is as they really start to scale and start to, really need to kind of accelerate audience growth, if that brand hasn't been established, if you haven't really built that brand, it gets really tricky to do that, because you're probably competing in a space where, hey, you've got competitors who are doing something in the same space, who are doing something similar. And so, of course, product is crucial, it's critical, but without a really strong brand that's really kind of driving kind of positive sentiment and emotional attachment as well to that product, it can get kind of very, very tricky. And it's very difficult to retroactively build a brand around an audience and around a product that hasn't really had one before. So I think, the reason why I mention this is, as we launch, we're in a great position because this brand it's defined, it's powerful. We know what's worked. We're evolving it all the time, of course, as any good brand should be. We're always looking at how to improve, how to tweak messaging, how to really kind of, frame our brand in the right kind of context and the right touch points. But we're pretty set on who we are and what our mission is and what our energy is as well. I think that's a really important thing. As we look to launch, we don't need to define anything new. We're confident. We know who we are. We know the value that we can bring as well. So yeah, that just sets us up. I think it's a really exciting time. Like, I can't wait to bring this brand and to bring this product that we've built just to the widest possible audience over the next year.
Yeah, that kind of just brings me to the final sort of few questions. And one of those is what is the outlook for shares over the next few years, really? What, it sounds like global takeover is on the cards. But...
We'll see. Fingers crossed. I think we've touched upon it, honestly. I think what we are doing is really kind of pushing into a new space in the world of investing. Investing, I think, if we take a step back, for so long has been, I think, a space that has been so kind of closely guarded by a select few, right? And, not that I'm saying we're the first to do this by any stretch of the imagination, but we are, really kind of pushing to open up this space to as many people as possible, right? I read this really great quote the other day that, the invention of the internet and the integration of, high-speed internet, to, smartphones, across the world is the single greatest leverage point for an individual's financial choices. I really love this idea, right? That anything that we create, anything that we build, and everything from the product to the brand that we're building, it has an outsized effect on potentially an individual's financial kind of leverage. And that's a really exciting base to start from, right? We're out of the gates now. We're out in the world. And we're very kind of conscious around that responsibility that we have as a brand, I think, to provide the best possible product from a content and brand perspective to really, enthuse and excite audiences about, starting to explore this world for the first time as well. So, yeah, I think, that expansion piece is going to be such an exciting part of our work over the next year. This brand work that we're looking at, we've talked about the Williams sisters. Just can't wait to, really kind of, show the world what we can offer and bring this kind of this product offering and this brilliant brand that we're building as well to the broadest possible audience.
It's very interesting too, because, whenever we talk about TikTok, we always end up talking about just sort of the influencer piece, not just the organic content piece. And there's always a lot of conversation around, said UGC and boosting and whatnot. But I think that organic play is incredibly interesting to discuss. And then also, obviously as well, the brand awareness piece and the Williams sisters. So before we clock off, let's take you through the quick fire round.
Let's go.
So what podcasts are you listening to at the moment?
So my number one podcast is Lenny's podcast. I don't know if you've heard this one.
I haven't. Yeah.
Lenny's podcast is just like, oh my God, every week, just like the smartest minds from, I'm not going to say just fintech. They do have a lot of like fintech guests, but CMOs, true marketing experts, often in kind of the space of finance, every week, just like so much value from that podcast. Amazing. Lenny's podcast.
I've written that down. And then aside from shares, what's your favorite fintech app?
Yeah, so there's so many that I'd love to choose from. Right now, especially from a brand perspective, I love what Cash App are doing. Cash App, like their cultural marketing is so perfect. The way they've like leveraged, I think, a lot of kind of ambassadors, influencers, especially in like the hip hop community, their integration into everything from like music videos into lyrics. They did this amazing brand campaign with like Kendrick Lamar last year. It's like true like lifestyle marketing, but in the space of fintech, just absolute genius. Like love everything they do.
Yeah, I've got to second that. I think they've done a great job with that. What's the best bit of life advice you ever received?
Best bit of life advice.
Yeah.
Best bit of life advice. Probably like quite an obvious answer, but like I always find myself going back to it. There's that Steve Jobs commencement speech. I think it's at Stanford University from a few years ago. The advice that he gives is really essentially saying, look, it's impossible to understand your journey through life, connecting the dots forward. It only makes sense when you look back that you can really make sense of things. And the example that he gives for that, which I love, is I think when he was at Stanford, he dropped out of his psychology course, I think it was, but stayed around campus for a few months and ended up attending these typography classes. So he learned all about typography and font purely because he was interested in doing it, right? Without thinking anything of it beyond like, hey, this is an interesting thing to do. Okay, fast forwards, 10 years, designing the first Apple, this idea of like, right, what if we introduce beautiful font, beautiful design into these first computers, right? It's only when you look back that these steps make sense. You can't do it moving forwards. It's only with like retrospective viewpoint that you can make sense of these things. So I love that one.
Cool. And what's one thing that I haven't asked you that perhaps I should have?
I think the big one that I'm surprised you didn't ask me was, is AI going to take my job? Which I think is what everyone's asking right now.
Tell me, do you think it will?
So what do I think about AI at the moment? I think in the short term, what AI is going to do is really just to make a lot of our jobs easier and more efficient. I think we're already seeing that. I mean, if you're not using, GPT-4 in your workflow every day, you're really kind of missing out on, I think, so much efficiency. I think kind of, moving forward to a bit more medium term, what do you think the people who are going to be most successful are going to be the people who are utilizing AI most effectively? It's as simple as that. So I don't think it's a question of, AI kind of rising up and, suddenly we're all losing our jobs. I think the people who really be successful into the future, and this goes across, every single discipline in marketing, people who can really kind of utilize AI. So now is the time to get experimenting, with ChatGPT, Midjourney. The list of tools is just absolutely endless. But yeah, it feels like really this is the time to kind of skill up, to learn what they can do for you. And hey, who knows? I think, in the not too distant future, we're going to be using these tools pretty consistently kind of throughout our work.
There's use cases kind of all across the board, really. I don't think it's going to be as, this is just me being cynical because I'm getting older. I just don't think it's going to be as, humongous and groundbreaking as all the headlines are making out to be. Every few years, something pops up and it's going to change the world. And
there's this quote that I really love around emerging technology, right, which is, we always overestimate its importance in the short term, but underestimate new technology's importance in the long term. Yeah. So right in the immediate, we think, oh my God, AI is going to take our jobs. Oh my God, this is going to be serious right now. And actually, we underestimate what the long-term impacts kind of really are going to be, which I think is always a really interesting way to look at it.
I was going to say, going back to what you were saying around, like, you're talking about obviously the mobile phones and having that leverage piece. The immediate impact, if you think about what short-term what people are thinking, but actually think about the long-term. I mean, the entire fintech industry is born from the fact, really, of having, iPhones in our pocket, or if you're unfortunate, Androids. And think about all of the roles and jobs and everything that's kind of come off the back of that, and all the tech that's built out of it. No, I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Oscar, thanks for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on board.
Thanks so much for having me.
The FML Podcast is brought to you by Growth Gorilla. To find out how our marketing growth experts can boost your fintech's growth, head to growthgorilla.co.uk. And make sure to search for the FML Podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Don't forget to click follow to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Growth Gorilla, thanks for listening.